All right, let's dive into one of the most incredible clashes in all of history, the Battle of Issus. Now, this was so much more than just a fight. It was a high-stakes showdown where empires hung in the balance, a moment decided by raw nerve, brilliant strategy, and the clashing wills of two larger-than-life kings.
So just try to put yourself in Alexander's shoes for a second. You're looking out across the field, and you've got your 40,000 tough, experienced soldiers with you. But facing you, a massive Persian army of 100,000. I mean, the odds are just staggering, more than 2-to-1 against you. And that really sets up the big question for us today. How in the world did he pull this off?
You know, this wasn't just two armies going at it. This was personal. It was a collision of two gigantic figures. You've got the young, brilliant, and incredibly ambitious Alexander on one side, and on the other, Darius III, the ruler of the mightiest empire on the planet, a man who probably thought he was invincible.
So let's set the scene. The year is 333 BCE. We're on this narrow strip of land in what's now Turkey, right by the Panaris River. Now, this is actually the second big fight between Alexander and the Persians, but what makes this one so special? It's the first time the two kings themselves would be on the same battlefield, looking each other in the eye.
And man, these two leaders could not have been more different. Alexander was a true warrior king. He was right there in the thick of the action, leading from the front, taking the same risks as his men. Darius, he was more of a traditional emperor, commanding from a safe distance in the rear, directing his massive war machine like a chess player. And that single difference in style, well, it's going to change everything.
So here's Alexander, deep in enemy territory, with an army less than half the size of his opponents. I mean, on paper, this looks like a suicide mission, but this battle was never going to be about who had more soldiers. It was going to be a classic showdown of quality versus quantity.
See, the Macedonian army was like a surgeon's scalpel. It was disciplined, incredibly precise, and absolutely lethal. You had the phalanx, this impenetrable wall of soldiers with these super long spears, and then the elite companion cavalry, which could strike like lightning. The Persian army, on the other hand, was more like a giant sledgehammer. Yeah, it was huge and powerful, but it was also slow, clumsy, and made up of all these different groups who didn't always work together seamlessly.
Darius looked at his massive army and thought he had this in the bag. He figured he'd set a simple trap, corner Alexander's smaller force, and just crush it with sheer numbers. But his whole plan was based on a massive, and I mean massive, miscalculation about the very ground they were about to fight on. Just picture it for a moment. The battlefield is this tight corridor. On one side, you've got these rugged mountains. On the other, the Mediterranean Sea. There's almost no room to move, no space to spread out your forces. It's a bottleneck. And here's the brilliant irony. Darius thought he had trapped Alexander, but he'd actually trapped himself. That narrow plain completely canceled out his biggest advantage. His huge army was all bunched up. They couldn't flank, they couldn't maneuver. All those extra soldiers were suddenly useless.
So with the terrain basically evening the odds, Alexander did something absolutely insane, something that would go down in history. He decided to go for the jugular, with a direct, personal charge aimed right at the heart of the Persian command.
Okay, so as the battle is raging, Alexander's hawk-like eyes spot it, a tiny, momentary gap opening up in the Persian line. He doesn't hesitate for a second. He personally leads his elite companion cavalry in this thunderous, head-first charge. He's not thinking about the rest of the battle. His focus is on one thing and one thing only, getting to King Darius.
This is the moment the world changed. Can you imagine being Darius? You're the king of kings, sitting in your war chariot, and suddenly you see this force of nature, led by Alexander himself, crashing through your lines and coming straight for you. And in that moment, Darius's nerve just shattered. He literally jumped out of his chariot, abandoned his army, and ran for his life.
The effect was instant and absolutely catastrophic for the Persians. When your soldiers see their king, their god emperor fleeing the battlefield, well, what's the point of fighting anymore? All hope just vanished. Persian resistance completely fell apart, and the battle turned into an absolute rout. So once the dust finally settled, the true scale of what just happened became crystal clear. The consequences were just enormous. This wasn't just a victory, it was the moment Alexander the Great's legend was truly forged, and it sent shockwaves that would completely reshape the ancient world. In the camp that Darius abandoned, Alexander found the ultimate prize, Darius' own mother, wife, and children.
But here is where Alexander showed his genius again. He treated them with the utmost respect, like visiting royalty, not prisoners. This act of chivalry earned him admiration even from his enemies. And that, combined with the impossible win, just cemented his reputation. He wasn't just a great general anymore. He seemed invincible.
Strategically, this victory was an earthquake. It gave Alexander a secure foothold in Asia, for sure. But more importantly, it was a massive psychological blow to the entire Persian Empire. Think about it. Word starts to spread across this huge empire that your king ran away. Loyalty to Darius started to weaken and crumble. You could literally see the cracks forming in this once mighty empire.
So the Battle of Issus was this perfect storm, right? A mix of tactical brilliance, the luck of the terrain, and a complete failure of nerve at the very top. And it really leaves us with this timeless question that we see again and again in history. At the end of the day, what's more powerful? The overwhelming force of a massive army or the unwavering courage of a single determined leader?